Wyoming Territory, spring of 1887. The wind howled across the empty plain as the stagecoach doors slammed open on the outskirts of Cheyenne, and Josephine O'Dell stepped down into the dirt, boots first. She was 36. And she looked every bit of it. Not from vanity or wear, but from the years she had carried on her back like full buckets through war, drought, and the burying of a husband who had never truly loved her. She had no children, no letters waiting, and nothing but a folded advertisement in her pocket. It read, "Widower seeks wife. Must be hard-working, of good health, and under 30. Homestead provided." Josephine had lied about her age when she responded. She had not lied about her heart. She waited 3 days in Cheyenne for the man who had sent the letter. When he arrived, he was clean-shaven, 28, and looked her up and down like he was checking a horse for flaws. "You are older than I expected," he said. "I can cook," Josephine said, steady. "I can sew, fix a roof, and ride a mule across snow if I have to. I asked for under 30. He left without another word. No apology. Josephine stood in the street with dust curling around her skirt hem, her trunk behind her, and the sound of rejection sinking in deeper than she expected. She did not cry. She was not that kind of woman. She rented a room above the general store with the last of her money and spent the next week sewing repairs for passing ranch hands to earn just enough for bread and coffee. There were no replies to the other letters she had written. On the 7th day, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find a girl no older than 8, barefoot, with tangled hair and a bruise on her cheek. "Are you the mail order lady?" the girl asked. Josephine blinked. "Who told you that?" "My mama said you came on the stage." "She's gone. My little brother is real sick. We live out by the river. He ain't breathing good." The girl's eyes were wide and too calm for her age. Josephine didn't ask questions. She packed a cloth bag with carbolic, willow bark, and clean rags, then followed the child out of town, past the cottonwoods and the crooked fencing, until they reached a sagging cabin beside the Platte River. Inside, a little boy maybe 5 lay on a straw-tick mattress, gasping, face flushed red. Josephine knelt beside him without hesitation. "What's his name?" "James," the girl whispered. "I'm June." Josephine touched James's forehead, then checked his pulse. Fever. Chest infection. She did what she knew: boiled water, mixed a poultice, and sat up through the night wiping his brow while June clung to her side. By dawn, the boy's breathing eased. Josephine looked around the cabin. There was no sign of their mother. "When did she leave you?" she asked quietly. June didn't look at her. "A week ago." Josephine held the girl close without speaking. It was not the first time she had seen a woman run. But it was the first time she had seen children left behind who still waited. A day passed. Then another. On the 3rd day, while Josephine was gathering firewood near the riverbank, she saw a man on horseback approaching from the north trail. He rode bareback, dark hair falling past his shoulders, with a rifle slung across his back. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his eyes locked on hers before his horse had even slowed. Josephine straightened. The axe was still in her hand. He dismounted, his boots sinking into damp earth. "You are not their mother." "No," she said. "Are you kin?" "I found their pony wandering. I followed the tracks here." His voice was calm, low. "The girl's name is June?" "Yes." He looked toward the cabin. "And you stay?" "They were alone," Josephine said. "I could not leave them." His gaze returned to her. He nodded once. "My name is Soren Black Elk," he said. Josephine hesitated. "Josephine O'Dell." He looked at her for a long time. "You are the woman who was rejected," he said. Her chest tightened. "I suppose I am." Soren's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "He must have been blind. Or a fool." Josephine blinked. She had not expected kindness. Not from him. "I am Lakota," he continued. My own people judge me for living alone. For not taking a wife. Josephine said nothing. The breeze tugged at the ends of her shawl. I help patrol the land along the river, he said. There are still men who would take children like these and sell them to mining camps. Her stomach turned. I will stay tonight. Watch the ridge, he added. They did not speak again until the sun slipped low. That night, Josephine watched from the doorway as Soren built a fire and sat beside it, rifle across his legs. She brought him a tin of beans and bread. He took it with a quiet nod. You are not afraid? He asked, after a while. Josephine looked at him, calm. You are not a man who scares me. He studied her face in the firelight. You are brave. She did not feel brave. She only felt tired. But when he said it, something deep in her chest stirred. The next morning, June ran to Soren as if she had known him all her life. James followed, weak but smiling. Soren lifted the boy into his arms as if he weighed nothing. They need more than I can give, Josephine said, watching them. So do you, Soren replied. She stared at him. He shifted James to one side. You are a woman with a heart too big to fit in a letter. That man in Cheyenne never deserved it. Josephine blinked hard against the burn behind her eyes. Soren stepped closer. I think you were always meant to be here. She did not know what to say. But June ran to her then, wrapping thin arms around her waist, and James reached out from Soren's arms, calling her name with trust in his voice. And Josephine knew. She was not going anywhere. Not anymore. The frost lifted slow that morning, clinging to the grass in silver beads as Josephine scraped the last of the coals into the ash pit. Soren had left before first light to hunt, leaving only his footprints in the soft earth and a length of rabbit hide he tacked across the gap in the cabin wall. He hadn't said where he was going, only that he'd return before the sun reached its peak. June fed James from a shallow tin bowl, coaxing him with quiet patience as Josephine stitched a torn pair of breeches at the table. The children's stillness unnerved her, too watchful, too cautious for one so young. She didn't press them with questions. She'd learned a long time ago that silence was its own kind of telling. By midday, the scent of roasted meat carried downwind before Soren appeared between the trees, a young mule deer slung across his shoulders. He moved without hurry, but the set of his jaw told her something had shifted. She met him near the lean-to. What's wrong? Tracks, he said. South of the ridge. Wagon. 2 riders. One was dragging a chain. Josephine brushed her palms on her apron. Was it heading this way? Not yet. But they were circling. Looking for something. Her throat tightened. Someone? He nodded once. She followed him as he dressed the deer, hands steady, blade sure. He didn't speak until the work was done. If they come too close, I'll take you and the children upstream. There's a winter shelter built into the bluff. My uncle's design. Hidden. Josephine's brow furrowed. You built it yourself? With him. During the last hard winter. He paused. A place for those who don't want to be found. Josephine looked toward the cabin, where June was braiding dried grass for the kindling box. You've had to hide before? More times than I care to count. The wind shifted. She pulled her shawl tighter. I'm not afraid of men like that. Not anymore. Soren turned toward her, his voice quieter now. You should be. You're not invisible. You're kind. She met his eyes. Kindness isn't weakness. No, he said. But it draws fire. Like a lantern at night. Josephine didn't reply. She watched the sky instead, where a hawk circled. The land stretched wide and brown beyond the trees, uncertain. It had always been uncertain. But standing beside him, it no longer felt impossible. That evening, they ate by the fire again. This time, June sat on Soren's left, James curled against his side, asleep before the food was gone. Josephine sat across from them, her knees drawn up, hands wrapped around a mug of strong coffee he'd brewed from a pouch tucked in his saddlebag. "You were married once," Soren said, not as a question. She didn't flinch. "Yes." "Did he die in the war?" "No. He died later. In body, at least." She stared into the fire. "He stopped speaking to me the day I told him I couldn't carry. He stayed another 5 years. Never touched me again. Then he went west to mine silver and never came back." Soren said nothing. The silence stretched. She was grateful for it. When she finally looked up, he was watching her not with pity, but something quieter. "I was promised once," he said. "To a girl from the Rosebud camp. We were 15. What happened?" "She left the winter after Wounded Knee. Her family went north, to escape the patrols. I stayed. I had too many graves to tend." Josephine reached across the space between them and set her hand beside his on the log. She didn't touch him, only left it there, close enough. "That grief," she said. "It never leaves, does it?" "No," he said. "But sometimes it gets lighter when someone else carries part of it." They sat like that until the fire burned low, and Josephine rose to lay James in the cabin while Soren banked the coals. She didn't speak again that night, but when she came back out, she sat beside him on the log instead of across from him. He didn't move away. "I'll take the first watch," he said. She nodded. "Wake me when the stars shift." He glanced at her. "You trust me that far?" "I trust what I've seen." Soren looked back out at the dark, his profile outlined in firelight. "Then I'll make sure you never have to be afraid again." Josephine didn't answer. She didn't need to. In that moment, the wind quieted. The river murmured low. And for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her life shift not away, but into something new. Something that might yet hold. The clouds rolled low and wide the next morning, heavy with the promise of spring rain. Josephine stood at the edge of the field behind the cabin, sleeves pushed to her elbows, turning over earth with a rusted spade she'd found beneath the lean-to. The soil was stubborn, thick with old roots, but it would hold seed if worked right. She paused only once, watching as Soren crossed the clearing with a rough sack slung over his shoulder and a coil of barbed wire hooked through his belt. He stopped beside her, dropping the sack near the fence line. "We'll need to clear 2 more rows if you want beans to come up before the frost ends." "I thought I'd start with potatoes," she said, wiping her brow with the back of her wrist. "Less temperamental." Soren crouched and tugged at the corner of a rotted stump with both hands. "You think ahead." "I've had to," she said. "Every place I've ever been, winter always came faster than folks expected." He worked in silence after that, pulling brush and stacking it in a neat pile to burn. When they paused to drink from the pail, Josephine noticed his right palm was raw, the skin opened in a shallow split. "You should wrap that," she said. "I've had worse." She took his hand anyway, pulling a strip of linen from her apron pocket and winding it snug. Her fingers were sure, movements practiced. He didn't flinch. "You treat wounds like someone who's done it often," he said. "I was the only woman left in our township for a stretch," she replied. "The others moved east when the cattle died off. I stayed until the roof caved in." Soren looked at her, not with surprise, but something steadier. "You don't leave when things go wrong." "I don't see the point," she said. "Might as well stay and fix what can be fixed." He lifted her hand before she could pull away. "That's what makes you rare." Josephine didn't answer. But she didn't move either. By afternoon, the children returned from gathering willow shoots along the riverbank. June carried a bundle tied with twine, and James trailed behind her, thumbing a smooth stone he found. Josephine called them in for cornbread and boiled greens, and they crowded around the table with the quiet familiarity of a family that had formed without anyone noticing the moment it began. Later, while the children napped inside, Josephine sat on the porch steps, mending the hem of James's shirt. Soren stood at the corral gate, watching the geldings sway under the sun. "What will you do once the rains come?" she asked. Build shelter for the mare. Reinforce the riverbank. The clay's been sliding. She set her needle aside. And after that? He turned to her. I thought I'd ask you the same. Josephine kept her gaze steady. I could stay. Soren stepped closer, slow. You already have. She studied the lines at the corner of his mouth. You don't speak much of what you want. Because it's not always mine to ask for. He said. Not when others have had so much taken. I'm not others, she said. He crouched in front of her then, resting one hand on the porch rail. I want you here. Not just until the boy mends or the rains end. I want to call you mine. She looked at him, the words sitting heavy between them. I'm not young, she said quietly. I don't want someone young, he replied. I want someone who knows how to stay. Josephine felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. You'd call me wife? I already have, he said. To the man who asked if you were the girl's mother. To the woman in the trading post who asked why you wore no ring. It's true, even if you haven't said yes yet. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Then asked me? He took her hand, rough and wrapped in cloth. Will you build this life with me? Josephine nodded once. Yes. I will. The wind picked up then, brushing through the cottonwoods and across the porch where their hands were joined. Inside, June rolled over and pulled a quilt tighter around her shoulders, her breath steady. James stirred but did not wake. Josephine leaned forward, her forehead resting against Soren's shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Under the wide Wyoming sky, with the scent of damp earth rising and a field waiting to be planted, they stayed like that, quiet, certain, and finally home. The sky broke open just after supper, long streaks of rain falling sharp and steady across the prairie. Josephine drew the children close on the cot, wrapping them in the wool blanket Soren had brought down from his shelter stash. The roof held, creaking but tight, and the fire burned low in the stone hearth, casting flickers across the rough-hewn walls. Soren stood by the door, watching the line where water met earth. His shoulders were damp, hair curling at the ends from the mist he'd walked through to check the horses. He didn't speak until Josephine stepped beside him, arms crossed, eyes following his. We'll need to dig a trench behind the cabin tomorrow, he said. I saw the slope, she replied. The runoff's already pooling near the back corner. He glanced at her without turning his head. You see everything. Only what needs seeing. His hand brushed hers, fingers resting just barely against her skin, as if learning the shape of silence between them. I've been thinking about how we might make it permanent, he said. Josephine raised an eyebrow. The trench? No, he said. Us. She let the stillness hold between them a breath longer than necessary. You mean by paper? A marriage license? If we go into town, he said, voice low, we'll need someone to watch the children. That old couple who lives past the ridge, Mr. and Mrs. Bell. She nodded. He's near blind, but she's got more sense than most. Soren turned to face her fully. Would you want it that way? A courthouse and a name in a book? She studied his face. I want whatever makes us unshakable. Outside, the thunder moved westward, softening as it went. The wind smelled of sage and wet cedar. Inside, the children slept without stirring. Soren stepped back and reached into the satchel he'd set by the door. He pulled free a folded square of hide, unwrapping it slowly. Inside lay a small copper band, simple and dulled with age. My father gave this to my mother when they had nothing but a lean-to and a promise. She left it with me when she passed. Josephine reached for it, but he held it a moment longer. I want you to wear it now, he said. Not because paper says so. Because I do. She took it carefully, turning it over in her palm. It's warm. It's been waiting a long time. Her fingers trembled as she slid it on. It fit without effort. She looked up at him, voice roughened by something she couldn't name. I never imagined I'd be chosen like this. Not after. He stopped her with one hand on her cheek. Don't speak of the past like it still owns you. Josephine nodded, just once. Then I'm yours. He kissed her then, slow and without pretense. No rush, no desperation, only the quiet certainty of a man who had waited for the right season, and a woman who no longer needed to be anyone but herself. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his. We'll go to Cheyenne in 2 days. Make it legal. Let the paper catch up with us. I'll ready the wagon, he said. And I'll ask Mrs. Bell in the morning. That night, they slept not apart, but together, the children safe between walls that no longer felt borrowed. Rain tapped soft against the roof, and the land outside turned greener by the hour. In the early hush before dawn, Josephine stirred awake to the sound of Soren's steady breathing beside her. She lay still, watching the fire's last embers glow and fade, the copper band glinting faintly on her finger in the half-light. It was not a grand life yet. But it was theirs. And it would hold. The wagon creaked beneath them as Soren guided it down the narrow road toward Cheyenne, the wheels dipping into ruts still soft with last week's rain. June and James rode in the back, curled together beneath a quilt, their heads resting against a burlap sack filled with oats and a jar of preserved cherries Josephine had bartered for with a patchwork quilt she'd finished the night before. The sun rose slow at their backs, warming the fields as the prairie came alive with birdsong and the rustle of new grass stretching through the thawed ground. Josephine sat beside Soren on the bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her bonnet tied firm beneath her chin. She'd borrowed a fresh blouse from Mrs. Bell, a deep green with tiny glass buttons, and had stitched a narrow ribbon into her hem that morning. She hadn't said why, and Soren hadn't asked. But he had seen the way her fingers lingered on the thread, as though each stitch was a promise being kept. They arrived in town just after noon. The clerk at the courthouse wore a drooping mustache and spectacles that slid down his nose as he asked them each to spell their full names. He didn't flinch at her age or his tribe. He only stamped the paper and handed it over with a brief nod and an ink-stained thumb. Soren signed first. Josephine followed. Her hand didn't shake. Outside, the wind carried the scent of pipe smoke and horses. They walked together down the boardwalk and into the mercantile, where Soren used the last of his winter pelts to buy a cast-iron cookpot and a spool of red thread. For mending, he said, handing it to her. And what's the cookpot for? She asked, tucking the thread into her pocket. He held the heavy pot in both hands. To feed a household that's going to grow. They returned to the Bells' homestead by dusk. Mrs. Bell met them at the gate, apron dusted with flour, her eyes sharp as ever. They were no trouble, she said. The boy likes to hum when he draws. Girl's been reading to him. Josephine thanked her and pressed a small parcel of tea into her palm. From Cheyenne. For your help. Mrs. Bell sniffed once. Man who brings a woman back home with her shoulders straight and her eyes soft is worth keeping, I'd say. They made the journey back in the dark, the children asleep before the wagon cleared the ridge. Josephine leaned against Soren's shoulder, the road familiar now, the trees shaped like memory. At the cabin, he lifted James without waking him, carrying him inside with the same quiet strength he always had. June followed, kicking off her shoes at the door before curling up on the cot with her brother. Josephine covered them both, smoothing the blanket flat. Soren stood behind her, his voice low. Tomorrow, I'll start the loft. They'll need space of their own. She turned to him. You've already given them more than space. He shook his head. You gave them the part that counts. A soft rain began again outside, tapping against the shuttered windows. Josephine reached for the kettle and poured 2 cups of water, dropping in the last of the dried mint he'd gathered along the riverbank. They drank by the fire, their knees touching beneath the table. Soren traced a finger along the edge of her cup. I've lived through winters where no one spoke to me for months. I've eaten alone more times than I can count. But I never knew how much it cost until now. Josephine looked at him over the rim of her cup. And now? Now I want your voice every morning. Your hands at the table. Your laugh when the boy tells a story that makes no sense. She laughed then, soft and surprised. You've never said that before. I've never had reason to. She set her cup down and reached across to him, her hand resting atop his. You have it now. So do I. That night, they lay together in the quiet, not for warmth or necessity, but because it had become the most natural thing in the world. She slept with her hand on his chest, his breathing deep and even beneath her palm. The days that followed unfolded with a kind of quiet rhythm. Soren raised a loft with salvaged timber and a rope pulley he built from scratch. Josephine taught June how to keep yeast alive between bakes, and James began carving small animals from scraps of pine, leaving them lined up on the windowsill like guardians. By midsummer, the garden had taken root. Corn reached knee-high, and beans wound themselves up twine stretched between fence posts. A coop stood behind the cabin now, filled with hens traded from a neighbor 3 miles east. Josephine's hands grew calloused again, but her shoulders were light. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields turned to gold, Josephine stood with Soren beneath the cottonwood behind the cabin. The children were chasing fireflies with cupped hands and muffled laughter. She leaned into him, her temple resting against his shoulder. You remember what you said about the trench? That we needed to make it hold? He nodded. I remember. Well, I think it did. He looked down at her. You mean the cabin? No, she said. Us. He kissed her then, slow and without hesitation, like a man who had chosen this life with both eyes open. And she kissed him back, not as a woman who had been left, or passed over, or waited too long, but as one who had found something worth planting in soil she'd never thought to call her own. Years passed. The garden grew. So did the children. June became the girl who read every book anyone brought her, and then asked for more. James took to building things small at first, then bigger. A stool. A fence. A cradle. They never asked why they stayed. They simply did, because the staying had become the shape of their lives. Josephine hung the copper ring on a nail by the door, where it caught the light each morning. But she never took it off.